Hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Good.
All right.
Glad to be here.
Welcome everybody in audience land. We're glad that you're here with us, and welcome to Language Grows Brains. And we've had a couple episodes. This is our third episode.
Mm-hmm.
And last time we left talking a little bit about the different approaches to studying language. We could study it as a set of structures. We could study it
Which
in
is
terms
some of the most common that people
absolutely
find, right? You've learned how to talk about your nouns and verbs, right?
Right, and your vocabulary and the number of words that you have, that type of thing.
Right.
And then we talked a little bit about a different approach where we look at the acquisition of the function. What is language used for? Why do we develop? In other words, why do we acquire a language that results in this development that's much more complex as our society becomes more complex? So I kind of want to pick up there today, if we can. And one of the things that I'm kind of puzzled by is why we think that language is just a set of words that you put together and string together. And from my perspective, and the second approach to looking at studying language is that language is more than just words.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I thought maybe that we would talk a little bit about that. And you had mentioned that, if you say a word like kitty, then that's not just a word, it's a concept.
Correct.
And so we kind of have to define that. Concepts are like mental images.
Right,
They could be visual images like graphics that you have in your head. A person could be thinking in movies as they're reading a book, or they could be thinking in graphics based upon an episode that they've seen or something of a TV show, or they could be thinking in, I've had people say they can do the marquee in their head, words that they actually can see as people talk, that type of thing. Yeah. So...
Vygotsky said, if I remember this quote right, it'll be a little off, was that a word is a painting. It's like a small story.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's really beautiful, because that's true, because a single concept is really a bunch of ideas that have come together.
Absolutely.
And I love that he described it that way. If you actually read his actual book and not just excerpts.
Yeah, and that's really important, especially with Vygotsky, because he had a few papers, but he had mainly the one publication that got translated. Vygotsky died in the 1920s, and his book, Thought and Language, was then translated in like 1952.
62.
62, was it?
MIT Press.
Yeah.
I had to learn that.
Yeah, and...
it's really beautiful.
Yeah, and even though it's a translation from the original Russian, it's still pretty much accurate compared to a lot of the interpretations. Because remember that when we look at language, we're using an interpretation of what it is that somebody says, or what it is that somebody, gives us a word and what that means to us. We're doing an interpretation based upon this past background that we have of our brains that are changing as we're putting information in.
So someone can say a word and we'll have a completely different mental picture than they're thinking.
Absolutely.
It can happen a lot. That's called a misunderstanding.
Yeah, or misperception, or miscommunication.
Yes.
There's some...
You're like, wait, did you mean that? Because my picture was not that. That's
no,
right.
not at all. And, when we start thinking about that, then we also can think about how words have multiple meanings to begin with, okay? And how a young child will have one meaning related to themselves, but as they grow older, that meaning actually changes. So... I was thinking about some examples of that, and the one that always comes to mind, of course, is a behavioral one, where you tell a kid to sit down. And I can't tell you the number of kids that I've seen where I've said, or somebody has said in the room, sit down to the kid, and the kid puts their bottom on the chair and stands right back up.
Right.
And it's like, see, the interpretation of that is that the kid is non-compliant. The kid is ornery. The kid knows what sit down means. The kid, if he knows what sit down means, he can say sit down. He can give me the rule to sit down. So why doesn't he sit down?
Right.
That's what I hear back. And I understand the frustration, but at the same time, you didn't tell him what else to do once he sat down.
That's true.
So,
he did. He sat down. Now he's done.
And he was totally compliant. He did exactly. Or one time I had a student teacher, who was walking some young second, third graders down the hall, and she was going to take them to the bathroom. And pretty soon I'm looking over there, I'm going, what the heck are they doing? And all of these kids have their hands on the wall, and they're coming to the vent pipe thing that stuck out in the wall, and they're crawling underneath it. Well, she had said to them in her instructions and her directions, she had said, put your hand on the wall. I want you to stay this close. I want you to stay this close to the wall. And so they did. And we had little ones that were too tall to really get under the pipe very well. And so they were actually literally against the wall on the ground.
Following instructions.
And they followed instructions. They did exactly what she said.
One of the first things I did with student teachers, because I've had quite a few in first and second grade as a classroom teacher, was say the word take a seat needs to get out of your, right? Because isn't that what people will say? Hey, everyone, take a seat. Well, let's be like really literal about that for a minute. Where? Where do I take it? Am I taking it here? Am I taking it there? What does it even mean? Where's my bottom go? I don't know. Yeah. So the words technically exist. Oh, I'm sorry. The words exist, right? And if you say that to a room full of adults,
right,
they'll know, like literally go sit down, right? But once again, the words themselves aren't carrying the meaning, are they?
No.
Right?
No, it's the thinking inside of the concepts. Yeah, that brings back a memory way back. Decades ago. I was supervising, and at the same time I was helping the student counsel with the parent about this kid. And so I went out into the waiting room, and I told the 6-year-old, I said, go take a seat. I turn around, and that kid literally has hold of this big stuffed chair by the back. He's standing behind the chair, holding onto it.
Well, you told him to,
and
right?
That's exactly what I told him to do, and I laughed at myself because I was so busy talking to the mother that I took and abbreviated all of that language down into just some words. So when we talk about words being, or language being more than just a string of words, then what we have to think about are those mental images that are coming from the patterns that we use. So we use a pattern of sit down. For example, I can stand back up. Sit down. Did you want me to, when I sit down, think about what I see on the page in front of me? They have to say that. Did you want me to take what I see in front of me and make pictures in my head? Then you have to tell me that. Did you want me to take those pictures and draw a picture about what it is that I am thinking in my head? Then you have to tell me that.
Right.
Did you want me then to write what it is that I see in my head and put those words down too? Then you have to tell me that. Okay? So the language becomes it's a lot of language that's got squished into this one little word.
Which is what we do in English.
Yes.
We have a lot of unspoken cues and things that we assume people understand.
Exactly.
And I'm sure there's people that are skeptical, like, well, I tell my class sit down, and they sit down. Well, that's might be true, but there's also kids who don't, or don't stay in their seat.
That's
or
right.
if you say that to a bunch of 3-year-olds in pre-K, you're probably going to get about 5 seconds of the sit down, and then they're back up, right?
That's exactly right.
I'm not taught pre-K, but from what I've heard, they don't always sit little and you're like, well, why don't they? I showed them how to sit down. They should just sit down. But once again, look what's going into that.
Yeah.
There's so much more to it.
Yeah, and especially with all the behavioral stuff, we'll say, well, the kid can say it. He knows what sit down, because I heard him tell the baby doll to sit down. And I said, and then they walked away, didn't they? So there's a lot of information that goes into a single word or concept. So what happens then is, as educators or neuroscientists, is that when we start thinking like adults, where we've got all of these concepts compressed into a single word, okay, then that's what we start looking for in the brain. We start looking for a specific place where a specific word might, in fact, be produced. And what the neuroscientists have found is that, there's no specific place for the word.
Why, not to be gross, they kind of keep people awake sometimes during brain surgery? Because they don't want to mess with a part that has important concepts.
Because they could be different for different people.
Yeah. So where we house I keep doing that. I'm very sorry, producer. I'm going to move that a little bit. Where we house our concept of mother might be a different spot than everyone else, right?
That's exactly right.
Or it's so whole brain, like we're pulling so many concepts for one that all of our brains lighting up for one concept, right?
And that's what language does, because
right.
of the function, not because it's a word, not because of the structure, but because
the brain
houses all of these concepts. Exactly.
Yes.
And so, you have one idea, and all of a sudden it may originate in a similar place, a similar region of the brain, but then you actually have a dorsal and a ventral circuit for that concept, and you have all the connections that go with it. Probably the most fascinating piece of research that I've seen recently about words anyway, from the neuroscientist, has to do with the fact that not only could they not find the word in the brain, but they also couldn't find why it is, or didn't have an explanation for why it is that when I say to you a word that's an action word, like carry,
Yes.
you can actually feel your arms as if they're carrying, even though you haven't moved.
Right. So then the motor strip of the brain
Right.
lights up when you hear a word that is an action word.
Right.
Even though you're not moving.
Right.
But it's housed in a space
Right.
that would tell your body to do it, which is
Exactly.
fascinating.
So the brain lights up. I say, and they use kick. That was one of the ones that they used a lot of. And they'd say, okay, we don't want you to move your legs at all.
Yeah.
Okay. But we're going to say a word to you, and then we're going to see what lights up. And what would light up is that motor synergy between doing the task itself and how that action is actually housed in language.
Yeah.
So language, it's not just a set of words that you string, and that goes all the way deep down into a task analysis of a word. Because if we look at words as just being words, then they consist of sounds and letters, that type of thing. And then we just kind of build them back up with kids. And unfortunately, we still do that a lot in education.
Right.
But the reality is that the brain doesn't function that way at all.
Well, and it's to think about, too, that everything that a child does, from learning to lift their body, learning to walk, because some children don't walk, some children with different brain issues like maybe cerebral palsy or things like that,
Right.
that motor function is inhibited.
Right.
But it's also our brain that tells us to do those things.
Absolutely.
Right? So the concept of walking is a concept in your mind, but also in the motor centers of your brain that activate when your language tells you to get up and walk.
Right.
Or even just get up from a chair.
Exactly.
Hold your body upright. Pick up my cup, right? This is all an act of cognition. It's not just random. Everyone just learns to walk. Everyone just
learns to talk. Everybody learns.
And then if you have a stroke and those areas of your brain are damaged, then you no longer can do those things, right? So there's that connection again that language is way more than words.
Absolutely.
And it's so housed in the brain in such amazing ways and very unique ways too.
Absolutely. and it has to be unique
person to person.
because each of us has an environment that's going to be unique.
That's right.
Even if you're twins and you're in the same household, the environment will be different.
Our
for
input,
you.
like what we're
exactly.
the information we can all sit in the same room and have the same thing told us, and we're all going to process it, take something away different. We have different angle we're sitting at. It's all different because we're not in the same body.
So that makes it not only unique, okay, from a neurological standpoint, brain function standpoint, but it also makes it unique in terms of what the concepts mean to us.
Correct.
And so that means also then that words, by themselves don't really hold the language together. So that language has to be, well, what was your intention when you told me to sit? What did you want? Okay. Well, I wanted you to sit, put your bottom in the chair. And when you put your bottom in your chair, I want you to take your eyes and use those eyes to look at, see what's on that page. And when you look and see what's on that page, then I want you to make pictures in your head so that you can do your work. When you do your work, because you've looked at the page and made pictures in your head, then I know that you're ready to go out to recess.
So there's a reason for everything we do.
Absolutely.
And if there's no reason, then we don't have the purpose. And then it doesn't have the intention we're hoping for.
Right.
Like the kid, whoever's around us, we all do this. Remember how we asked you to talk about how you're using your language, right? But without that, why am I doing this?
Right.
That's also part of the cerebral cortex and that prefrontal cortex, the decision making. And if you're young and no one ever told you those becauses either.
That's right.
We wouldn't know. So if you do have children like you're working with or in the classroom and they're the ones who are like, oh yeah, I said sit down. They're like, wonderful. I'm like, great. So they knew the because. And they had a picture of it in their head and they knew what their body was supposed to look like. But we can't assume that, can we?
No.
Right.
No, because what we're finding out is that a lot of people today don't really spend a lot of time talking with their kids, It's very different to have a purpose, intention, and have an idea of what we want to communicate. We talked last time about the idea of having not only ideas, but having beliefs, and then also having our language affect behavior. Okay, well, we want something, okay, when we use our language. And that's how the brain and the human has evolved, okay? But if you don't use your brain that way, then the brain evolves differently. And it has been doing that in the last 60 years. It's been becoming much more pattern-based. Tell me what I need to know. Tell me how to do it. Tell me what to write.
Tell me what you want to
Tell
see
me
from
what
it.
to see. Yeah. Tell me how to do the job. Show me how to do it. Okay. And then we have, 40% of our employers out there saying we don't have people that have high enough language to be literate on the job. Well, that's because we're not asking them to think, to use their brains for language to help grow their brains.
Right, when they're, learning and growing and
Absolutely.
from that 0 to 18, we're not, pushing
0
them
to 7.
Well, yeah, that's
critical.
critical.
That's critical.
But how much are we asking kids to problem solve after that? Even
Yeah,
in
and make
school?
choices and decisions. And, if I have to, if I'm supposed to sit, okay, because my parents are busy or they're on their phone or on their tablet or on their computer or whatever, then what am I supposed to do? I didn't come born with a brain that was already set up for me to entertain myself.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I need to have a task, whether it's helping you do chores, which is what we used to do on the farms and stuff like that, is help with chores. Okay. And you would take a preschooler and they could count the eggs. All right.
Or pick the blueberries.
Or pick the blueberries or do whatever they had to do to help. Maybe it was stacking the wood. Okay. But they weren't being entertained by something that was inanimate that was basically telling them what to do.
Right.
Or if I don't like what you do, I can turn you off.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because you can't, on person to person, we don't do that because we can't do that.
I'm not going to turn you off.
I'm
done. Well, I've heard that with
finished.
kids. I'm all done.
Finished.
I'm finished.
Stop. I've had a 3-year-old one time say, "Talk to the hand." It's like, okay, I know that came from home, but
that's
but at the
funny.
same time, I'm trying not to
Yes.
laugh, and you got a 3-year-old,
Yes.
like, yeah,
Yeah, we're not
Talk
a
to
screen.
the-
We're not a screen. We can't just turn us off. And
yeah,
screens
exactly.
don't push you to the next level, ask you to solve problems, ask you to explain your thinking. They don't do it. They just don't.
No.
Yeah. And our brains aren't hardwired for that.
No.
They need that information.
Absolutely. So we have to learn, we have to grow those brains, and we have to learn everything that we're going to take into a complex society.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, and that means all the problem solving, and we have to make good choices, and we have to be able to explain those to other people, and we have to tell them why. We have to be able to do the who, what, when, where, and why, and how. We have to be able to do all those kinds of things with our language.
Right.
And so the question then becomes for you to think about as we're starting to wrap up today is that I want you to think about how much of your day is spent in the because world, in the why world. What is it that you're explaining to other people? What are you explaining to yourself? What are you learning new today that's going to keep your brain growing?
Right.
Because we know that older people do a whole lot better when they learn something new. So people
Correct.
take up painting, they take up instruments, they take up learning languages, they get out, they socialize. That's one of the factors. I'm old enough now that they ask me that question every time I go to the doctor. It's like, are you out socializing? Who do you socialize
And you're
with?
like, now I'm doing a podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, and that's kind of different, because a lot of people after they get their education done, at about age 22 or maybe at 18, they start settling down. And as soon as they do, we see actually a decline in the brain function. And so here we are, age 30 maybe, 35, some of you maybe 40, 45, 50. Am I hitting home at all? You get into this routine and into this structure. And what that means is that you're not growing your brain, okay?
Yeah.
And to get out, maybe through your kids. Maybe they have some activities that they're doing. Maybe it's through your home life. But maybe if you're an educator, you're in the classroom doing this too. Or maybe you're a young person, and yeah, you can show that baby all the little happy rattles and all the little books and stuff in the world, but you're not going to grow their brain for a language unless you're actually doing the becauses.
Right. And that was what I want to make sure we really, really sent away with was the power of the because, right? That's where you really take, just all the learning to the next level. If you have to answer why, And our children will do this, right? Why? And then suddenly you're like, I don't care. I have to make dinner, right? Just let me go. But it's those whys that are growing in their brain, because you take it to that next understanding and then you go to the next connection. And that's what's happening. Every because makes that new connection in the brain. Right?
Absolutely.
It grabs another little neuron, then it grows another circuit. And the next thing you know, the becauses are what's growing that structure.
That's right.
And later, when I like to think of it as it's growing that future capacity. So if you always have like restricted answers to your questions, if you are this,
just because,
do
just
it.
Because
I said so.
I'm busy.
Yeah,
don't interrupt.
That's right. If that's all your input, you're actually restricting the growth of the brain, right?
Absolutely.
And it's I know sometimes it's tiring to keep going with the whys and the becauses. Some of us who've done this work for a while, we very much go to the because very naturally. But we need to think about that. I would love people to think about, are you using because in your language? They're right.
Absolutely.
Like what you said, like, do you use it with other adults? Do you use it with children? Do you use it with your colleagues? Are you using because? Are you explaining your thinking? Are you going to the next level? Because that's what's missing.
Absolutely.
I see it missing, right?
I do too.
And I had to be very intentional about it when I was in the classroom with students.
Absolutely.
I said there's always a because. And then also extending their thinking. I'm working with a student right now, one-on-one, and this particular student, I've noticed that when I ask them questions based off, we'll show you some pictures later, what we're talking about here, based off of a picture, the answers back are quite restricted. Very much one, and this is
And you're in middle school, right?
No, this is a student who's probably around 8 years old.
Okay.
But getting 1 and 2 word answers. Therefore, I continue to say, but why? Why are they doing this? Why is this important? Why did they pack this for this trip? And why do they have a trailer versus a track? So I keep doing that. And it's funny because this student just keeps looking at me like, lady, what? Do not know all this stuff? Because we're talking about like a camping trip, and this student in particular goes camping. And I'm like, well, then tell me. Like, remember how you say you just kind of play dumb sometimes? Like, what? I don't know about football. Why don't you tell me, right?
And yet you know a whole lot about it.
She knows a lot about football. She's a football lady.
Okay.
But getting the kids to think like that, to keep pressing them, and other adults in your life too. I think that's really what's missing, is this idea of explaining where we're coming from and why we're there. That goes into the kind of cultural stuff we were talking about as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of win-win to using the because.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking of all these different examples because there's so many out there. You know, the one thing, well, there's a couple things here. One is that you mentioned all the why questions and we kind of get tired and that type of thing. But if you think about really good language acquisition, what happens is that, you know, a child will pick up a pattern. Mama. And she said mama, you know, and you think, okay, got her first word. Well, not exactly. That's kind of a pattern.
Right.
But, you know, what does it mean? Okay, well, it could mean I want some juice. I want you to be closer. I want to cuddle. I don't want the juice. It means a lot of different things. And the research has shown that. We have really good research from 50 years ago that shows that. That little baby actually has all these different intentions. And then they begin to expand. They have these relationships. You know, and they expand. So by 3, you've got these little simple sentences. You know, it's about me, okay? But I'm going to tell you about my doll, okay? And my toys. And no, that's my dog, okay? That type of thing. Well, the brain is still growing. It's between 0 and 7, so that brain is still growing. What's interesting now is that I need to understand how I take that simple idea, those simple relationships, and actually expand the meanings, okay? And as I start to try to expand the meanings, try to tell you more, okay, about the world that I live in, I need you to help answer the questions that I have about things I don't understand. So, Bonnie, would you roll down that window? You know, if I said, you got a kid in the back seat, and they're in their car seat, and they say, you know, Mama, roll down the window, okay? And you say, okay. So you push the button, down comes the window. You know, in my old language, I say roll it down.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
down comes the window. Okay, and no. I said, no, roll down the window, or whatever the kid says. Put down the window. You know, and I said, well, I did put it down. And it's like, I want the window down. I put down the window. And you're sitting there going, what the heck?
What do they
does that-
mean?
What
Yeah.
do they mean? And then you start getting, why did you push that button? Why did the window roll down? Because that's a 4-year-old. Okay, and they start asking all these questions. What they want you to say is what's happening to make that window roll down. Okay, and they want all the language.
Yeah.
They want all the language. They want to know that when you push that button, that it activates some type of roller that actually pushes the window down. And when the roller gets dirty, it doesn't go down. So my roller got stuck on my window, and therefore it wouldn't go down. So I'm pushing the button, but it's not going down. Okay, they want to know that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and yes, it takes energy. Yes, it takes time.
Yeah.
But you are growing the brain that way.
Absolutely,
like
we
you
need
said,
it.
and we need that. We need to be able to help our kids develop a language system. And when you talk about having an 8-year-old that's answering in 2-word utterances, we have a lot of our school age, even up until college. I saw a really cute cartoon, and I'll kind of end on this week. It was really, really cute. It said, I sent you a text message, and I expected an immediate response. If I don't get a response to your text message, I might as well have sent it by mail.
Okay.
Okay, and that's kind of the life that I'm living in the world that I live in today, is that I'm used to language being a form of communication and helping us build our brains, grow our brains, be able to think and problem solve, and get the service when I go out into the social network that I live in, and have people respond when I call them up and say, will you please come and service my heater, or please come and fix my refrigerator. And what I'm finding is that the person assumes that I know what they're thinking, therefore they don't respond to the phone call, they don't respond to the text message, they don't respond to the email, and they show up on my porch. I'm there, or I might not be there. But the reason they do is because they never, ever got a chance to get that language up to a high enough level to be able to think from the other person's perspective. What is it that I say that I need, or what is it that I'm going to do that they need the language for?
Right.
They've never gotten to that point. And so we're seeing that a lot today. So not just in the schools, but in the community. If I want somebody for service, I need to have them problem solve. All right. So, this week, think about problem solving. Think about how you're growing your brains. Think about your becauses. Think about, am I using because? Am I explaining myself? Am I responding in a communicative way that lets the other person know why the because?
Yep.
And we'll see you hopefully the next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
All right. See you next time. Bye.